July 4, 1944. 23,000 feet above occupied France. 0245 hours. Hauptmann Klaus Richter couldn't suppress his confident smile as he guided his Messerschmitt Bf 110 G4 through the moonless night sky over Normandy. Through the green glow of his Liechtenstein SN2 radar scope, he watched the clumsy silhouettes of British bombers returning from their raids, lumbering through the darkness like blind cattle. In 3 years of night fighting, Richter had claimed 47 victories, all in darkness so complete that his targets never saw what killed them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "The night belongs to us," Richter transmitted to his radar operator, Oberfeldwebel Wilhelm Schmidt, his voice carrying the casual confidence of a predator surveying helpless prey. "The British fly at night because they cannot survive our day fighters. The Americans refuse to fly at night because they lack our expertise. We own the darkness, and they know it." What Richter didn't know, what none of the supremely confident Nachtjagd pilots circling through European skies could have possibly imagined, was that an entirely new predator had arrived in their domain. One that didn't just operate in darkness, but was designed from the first rivet to hunt in total blackness using technology the Luftwaffe had never encountered. Within minutes, Richter's Bf 110 would appear on a radar scope in a matte black American aircraft specifically built to kill night fighters, and the hunter would discover what it felt like to be hunted by something invisible, something that could see perfectly in the darkness he trusted to protect him. The P-61 Black Widow had arrived in European skies, and German night fighter pilots were about to learn that the technological superiority they'd enjoyed for 3 years had just ended. But on that July night, as Richter positioned for another kill, the Nachtjagd had no idea they were being stalked. The Luftwaffe's dominance of night fighting had been nearly absolute since 1940. When RAF Bomber Command shifted to night operations to escape catastrophic daylight losses, German night fighters had evolved into a sophisticated force that turned darkness from sanctuary into slaughterhouse. Major Werner Hoffmann, commanding Nachtjagd-Geschwader 4 from his base at Florenz, Belgium, explained the philosophy in a July 1944 briefing that would be captured weeks later. "Night fighting is not simply day fighting in darkness. It is an entirely different form of aerial warfare, requiring specialized equipment, extensive training, and operational experience that cannot be acquired quickly. We have been perfecting these techniques since 1940. The British learned to fear us. The Americans, wisely, do not even attempt night operations over Europe." This confidence was built on hard-earned mastery. German night fighter crews underwent months of specialized training in instrument flying, radar operation, and night intercept procedures. The aircraft themselves, primarily Bf 110 and Ju 88 variants, carried sophisticated Liechtenstein radar sets that could detect bombers at ranges up to 4 miles. The radar operators, sitting behind the pilots, had become so skilled they could identify aircraft types by the radar return signature alone. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Oberleutnant Franz Becker, a radar operator with 31 confirmed night kills, described the tactical advantage in his combat diary. "The British bombers are helpless. They cannot see us approaching. They cannot evade what they cannot detect. Their defensive gunners fire blindly into darkness, while we position ourselves using radar, close to optimal range, and destroy them with precise fire. It is not combat. It is systematic execution. They know we are somewhere in the darkness hunting them, but they cannot find us before we find them. The statistics supported German confidence. Between 1940 and 1944, Luftwaffe night fighters had destroyed over 3,000 RAF bombers. Individual aces like Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer claimed over 100 night victories. The night fighter force had evolved sophisticated tactics, including tame bore, or radar-guided intercepts, and wild bore, or visual intercepts over burning cities, making bomber streams suffer losses that sometimes exceeded 5% per mission. More significantly, the Germans believed, correctly for a time, that they possessed technological and tactical advantages that would take years for opponents to match. Night fighting required not just courage, but specialized equipment and extensive training that Allied forces had struggled to develop.
What reinforced German confidence was the notable absence of American night fighting capability over Europe. While the RAF struggled through darkness in their night bombing campaign, the U.S. 8th Air Force conducted exclusively daylight operations, partly from doctrine, but partly because they lacked effective night fighters. Captain David Morrison, intelligence officer for 8th Fighter Command, reported in March 1944, "German night fighters operate with near impunity over occupied Europe. They've destroyed over 200 RAF bombers in the past month alone. We possess no night fighting capability that could challenge them. Our P-38s and P-47s, excellent day fighters, lack the specialized equipment for night operations. The Germans know this. They've adjusted their tactics accordingly, using darkness as a sanctuary." The few American attempts at night fighting with adapted day fighters had proven disastrous. In February 1944, 6 P-38 Lightnings equipped with primitive searchlights attempted night intercepts over France. 3 were lost to friendly anti-aircraft fire, 1 crashed during night landing, and the remaining 2 never made contact with German aircraft. The experiment was quietly abandoned. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Chen, commanding the 415th Night Fighter Squadron still training in the United States, understood the magnitude of the challenge. Night fighting is not day fighting with the lights off. It requires purpose-built aircraft with sophisticated radar, specialized instruments for blind flying, crew coordination between pilot and radar operator, and months of training in conditions where a single mistake means spinning into the ground before you realize you're in trouble. The Germans have been doing this since 1940. We're starting from zero. What Morrison and Chen didn't mention, because it was highly classified, was that a solution was already in development. A weapon specifically designed to challenge German night fighting supremacy was completing final testing and would soon deploy to European skies.
The Northrop P-61 Black Widow represented a radical departure from conventional fighter design. While most fighters were adapted for night operations, the P-61 was conceived from inception as a dedicated night fighter incorporating every lesson learned from British and German night fighting experience. The aircraft that first flew in May 1942 shocked even its designers with its size. With a wingspan of 66 feet and length of 49 feet, the P-61 was enormous for a fighter, larger than many medium bombers. 2 Pratt & Whitney R2800 engines, producing 2,000 horsepower each, powered the 30,000-pound aircraft to speeds exceeding 360 miles per hour. But size was necessary for the revolutionary capability built into the Black Widow's design. Colonel James Harrison, overseeing P-61 development at Northrop, explained the philosophy. "We're not building a fighter that operates at night. We're building a night hunter that happens to be an aircraft. Everything about this design prioritizes night fighting effectiveness over conventional fighter characteristics." The centerpiece was the SCR-720 radar, the most sophisticated airborne intercept radar yet developed. Mounted in the aircraft's nose, the radar could detect targets at ranges exceeding 5 miles and track them down to under 400 feet. Unlike German Liechtenstein sets that required manual range tracking, the SCR-720 provided automatic ranging and could distinguish between multiple targets simultaneously.
Technical Sergeant Martha Rodriguez, working on radar installation at the Hawthorne facility, recalled the capability. "We tested the SCR-720 against aircraft flying evasive maneuvers at night. The radar held lock through turns, climbs, dives, maneuvers that would break tracking with German sets. The radar operator could watch the target's every move on his scope, while the pilot flew instruments. It was like having night vision that could see through clouds and darkness for miles." But the P-61's lethality extended beyond detection. The primary armament, 4 20mm cannon mounted in the belly, could destroy any aircraft with a 1-second burst. Additionally, a dorsal turret mounting 4.50 caliber machine guns provided defensive capability and could be aimed by the radar operator, allowing the gunner to fire at targets the pilot couldn't see. The crew arrangement was equally revolutionary. 3-man crews, pilot, radar operator, and gunner, sat in tandem under a clear bubble canopy, providing 360-degree visibility. The radar operator, positioned behind the pilot, controlled the intercept using his radar scope while verbally guiding the pilot into attack position. This division of labor allowed the pilot to focus on flying while the radar operator managed the tactical situation.
Converting day fighter pilots into night hunter crews proved nearly as challenging as developing the aircraft. The 422nd Night Fighter Squadron, the first P-61 unit scheduled for European deployment, began intensive training at Kissimmee Army Airfield, Florida, in January 1944. Captain Michael Harrison, commanding the 422nd, discovered that conventional fighter pilot skills were almost irrelevant to night fighting. "I had pilots with 500 hours in P-47s who couldn't keep a P-61 straight and level on instruments in simulated darkness," Harrison recalled. "Night fighting requires surrendering visual references and trusting instruments completely. It requires pilot and radar operator working as a seamless unit, with the pilot responding instantly to verbal commands while blind. Many excellent day fighter pilots simply couldn't make the transition." The radar operators faced an even steeper learning curve. Lieutenant James Cooper, transitioning from bombardier training to become a P-61 radar operator, described the challenge. The SCR-720 scope showed a green circle with bright spots representing radar returns. You had to distinguish targets from ground clutter, track evasive maneuvers, calculate intercept angles, and verbally guide the pilot, all while watching a small glowing screen in total darkness. The German radar operators had been doing this since 1940. We had 6 months to match their expertise. The training program that evolved was brutal. Crews flew 80% of their training hours at night, practicing intercepts against B-24 bombers flying evasive maneuvers. They trained in all weather conditions, learning to trust their instruments when clouds eliminated all visual references. They practiced emergency procedures in darkness, knowing that engine failure at night meant bailing out into blackness with no visual reference for altitude or attitude. By May 1944, the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron had achieved operational readiness. 36 P-61 Black Widows, painted matte black to eliminate any reflection of searchlights or moonlight, were prepared for deployment to Europe. The crews had averaged 200 hours of night flying time, still less than German night fighter crews, but sufficient for combat operations. Major Werner Hoffmann, preparing his monthly intelligence summary for Nachtjagdgeschwader 4 in June 1944, noted rumors of American night fighters but dismissed them. "Intelligence suggests the Americans are developing night fighting capability. However, effective night fighter operations require years of experience and sophisticated equipment we know they lack. Any American night fighting attempts will be easily countered by our experienced crews operating proven equipment. The night remains our domain."
The 422nd Night Fighter Squadron arrived at Scorton, England on May 23, 1944, with their black-painted P-61s generating immediate interest from RAF personnel who had never seen the type. Squadron leader David Thompson of RAF 85 Squadron operating Mosquito night fighters from an adjacent base, inspected the P-61s with professional curiosity. Bloody enormous for a fighter. But the RAF blokes who'd seen the radar said it was years ahead of anything we had. The Yanks are quite secretive about it, wouldn't let anyone near the radar equipment. They claimed it could track targets through evasive maneuvers at ranges we couldn't achieve. We were skeptical. Night fighting is about experience as much as equipment, and these crews were green. The skepticism was understandable. The 422nd's crews, while thoroughly trained, had exactly zero combat experience. They would be facing German night fighter pilots who had been hunting in darkness since 1940, operating over territory they knew intimately, supported by ground radar networks that could vector them toward targets. Captain Harrison's operations order for the squadron's first combat mission, scheduled for July 3, 1944, reflected the challenge. Primary objective: intercept German night fighters operating against RAF bomber streams. Secondary objective: validate P-61 combat effectiveness in European theater. Tertiary objective: survive initial contact with experienced enemy night fighter force and return with lessons learned. The mission briefing on July 3 was tense. 12 P-61s would patrol at various altitudes above the expected bomber stream route, using their radar to locate German night fighters hunting the bombers. The American crews would be hunting hunters, trying to find experienced predators in their own territory at night in contested airspace filled with friendly and enemy aircraft. Lieutenant Robert Morrison, pilot of Black Widow 425559, nicknamed Midnight Rider, recalled the briefing. We were told to expect German night fighters equipped with radar, flown by experienced crews who'd shot down hundreds of bombers. Our advantage was supposedly superior radar that would let us find them before they found us. But we'd never faced combat. They've been doing this for years. On paper, we had better technology. In practice, we were rookies entering a veteran's game.
July 4th, 0237 hours. Lieutenant Morrison and his radar operator, Lieutenant James Cooper, were patrolling at 23,000 feet above Normandy when Cooper's SCR-720 radar suddenly displayed a contact. Contact, 11 o'clock, 4 miles slightly below us, Cooper reported calmly, his voice carrying none of the excitement Morrison felt. The training had emphasized that night fighting required ice-cold discipline. Emotions killed faster than enemy fire. Morrison adjusted course while Cooper tracked the target, providing continuous updates. Closing, 3 miles. Target descending slowly, 2 miles. Appears to be positioning for attack on bomber stream below. Through his canopy, Morrison could see nothing. Just blackness so complete he couldn't distinguish sky from ground. He was flying entirely on instruments, trusting Cooper's verbal guidance and the green glow of his instrument panel. 1 mile. Target steady. Recommend weapons hot, Cooper advised. Morrison armed his 420mm cannon. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, invisible to his eyes but clear on Cooper's radar scope, was a German night fighter, probably stalking a British bomber, completely unaware that something was now stalking him. Half mile. Target straight ahead, slightly below. You should have visual. Morrison strained his eyes into the blackness. Nothing. Then, a flicker. A barely visible silhouette against the slightly lighter sky, blocky twin-engine shape. Messerschmitt Bf-110. The shape grew larger as Midnight Rider closed. Inside that Bf-110, Hauptmann Klaus Richter was focused entirely on his own radar scope, tracking a Lancaster bomber at 20,000 feet, completely absorbed in positioning for his 48th kill. His radar operator, Schmidt, was calling ranges to the target. Neither man was watching their tail warning receiver, which suddenly erupted with urgent beeping, the warning that another radar was tracking them. "We're being tracked," Schmidt shouted, his voice cracking with shock. "Fighter radar behind us!" Richter's blood froze. Fighter radar? The British bombers didn't have fighter radar. The Americans didn't operate at night. What was tracking them? He threw the Bf-110 into a violent turn, abandoning the bomber, focused only on escape. but the turn was too late. Morrison, with the BF-110 centered in his illuminated gun sight at 400 yards, pressed the firing button. 4 20mm cannon erupted. Their muzzle flashes briefly illuminated Midnight Rider's nose. The converging streams of cannon shells, each explosive projectile traveling at 2,800 feet per second, took less than half a second to reach the German fighter. The result was catastrophic. 20mm shells exploded along the BF-110's left engine and wing root. The engine disintegrated in a fireball. The wing structure failed. The aircraft rolled inverted and entered a death spiral toward the Norman countryside 23,000 feet below. Morrison watched the burning aircraft fall, his hands shaking on the controls. "Splash 1 bandit," he reported, his voice not quite steady. "Confirmed kill," Cooper replied clinically. "Good shooting. I'm scanning for additional contacts." Below them, Hauptmann Klaus Richter and Oberfeldwebel Wilhelm Schmidt died before their aircraft hit the ground, never fully understanding what had killed them. They knew they'd been tracked by fighter radar, but from where? The Americans didn't have night fighters. Did they?
By dawn on July 4th, confused and frightened reports were filtering through Luftwaffe Night Fighter Command from multiple Nachtjagdgeschwader units. At least 4 German night fighters had been lost under mysterious circumstances, attacked from behind by unidentified aircraft using fighter radar. Major Werner Hoffmann, receiving the reports at his headquarters, initially refused to believe them. Fighter radar tracking night fighters? Impossible. The Americans have no night fighting capability. These losses must be from British mosquitoes or navigation errors causing crashes. But the reports were too consistent. Multiple crews reported being tracked by unknown fighter radar before being attacked. One pilot who survived his aircraft being hit described seeing muzzle flashes from a large, dark aircraft before his gunner was killed. The description didn't match British mosquitoes. It suggested something larger, heavier. Oberleutnant Franz Becker, whose radar operator instincts had saved him from an attack he never saw coming, filed the most detailed report. At 0248 hours, tail warning receiver activated, indicating fighter radar tracking from astern. Executed emergency evasion before visual contact. Observed brief muzzle flashes from large aircraft silhouette, not mosquito configuration. Radar return suggested twin-engine aircraft, wingspan significantly wider than standard fighters. Aircraft did not pursue after my evasion. Assessment: Americans have deployed new night fighter type with advanced radar capability. Hoffmann's intelligence officer, Hauptmann Ernst Weber, delivered an assessment that afternoon that would prove prophetically accurate. The Americans have introduced a purpose-built night fighter to the European theater. Preliminary reports suggest radar superior to our Liechtenstein systems and heavy cannon armament. If these initial reports are accurate, we may be facing the first American aircraft specifically designed to challenge our night-fighting superiority.
What German intelligence failed to comprehend was the extent of American radar superiority. The Liechtenstein SN2 radar that equipped German night fighters, while effective, was fundamentally limited technology, already approaching obsolescence in 1944. Lieutenant James Cooper, explaining the difference to new P-61 crews arriving in August, put it in simple terms. German radar is like looking through a pipe. They see what's directly in front of them, but tracking evasive targets requires skill, and the target often escapes their scan. Our SCR-720 is like having a searchlight you can sweep across the entire sky, holding lock through any maneuver, tracking multiple targets simultaneously, providing automatic ranging. We don't hunt in darkness, we hunt in illuminated sky that only we can see. The technical specifications supported this confidence. The SCR-720's minimum range of 400 feet meant P-61 crews could track targets right up to visual range. The maximum range, exceeding 5 miles, meant they could detect German fighters before German radar could detect them. The automatic range tracking meant radar operators could focus on tactical decisions rather than manual range calculations.
Additionally, the SCR-720 operated on frequencies that German tail warning receivers couldn't detect. German night fighters had no way of knowing they were being tracked until cannon shells started exploding around them. But technology alone didn't guarantee success. The P-61 crews still needed to master the complex art of night intercept, developing tactical procedures that would maximize their technological advantages against experienced opponents who owned years of combat experience. Captain Harrison, analyzing the squadron's first week of operations, identified the critical success factors. We find them before they find us because of radar range advantage. We approach from angles their radar can't cover because we understand their equipment limitations. We fire from ranges where our 20mm cannon are effective while we're still difficult to see visually. And critically, we disengage immediately after firing, using our speed to escape before they can react. We're not dogfighting, we're assassination missions using radar to guide the knife thrust. By mid-July 1944, the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron had claimed 12 German night fighters destroyed, with 0 P-61 losses. The Black Widows were systematically hunting down the hunters, and German Night Fighter Command was discovering that the darkness they'd owned for 4 years suddenly belonged to someone else.
August 1944. The psychological transformation within Luftwaffe night fighter units was unmistakable. Crews that had operated with predatory confidence now approached each mission with growing dread. Oberlieutenant Franz Becker, who had survived 3 encounters with P-61s through exceptional situational awareness and aggressive evasion, wrote in his combat diary, "We are no longer hunters, we are the hunted." Every night mission now involves constant scanning of the tail warning receiver, knowing that American radar could be tracking us at any moment. The confidence we felt stalking British bombers has been replaced by the constant fear that something invisible is positioning behind us. The darkness that protected us now conceals our executioners. Major Werner Hoffmann, analyzing loss statistics for July, faced numbers that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. Nachtjagdgeschwader 4 had lost 14 night fighters to American P-61s in 1 month, more than they typically lost in 3 months of operations against RAF bombers. Worse, the kill ratio was completely one-sided. 14 German losses, 0 P-61 losses confirmed. The Americans have achieved what we believed impossible, Hoffmann reported to Luftwaffe Command. They have fielded a night fighter superior to our aircraft in radar capability, equal in speed and maneuverability, and crewed by pilots who, despite limited experience, are employing their technological advantages with increasing effectiveness. We are facing systematic attrition against an opponent we cannot effectively counter. The tactical problem was insurmountable. German night fighters, designed to hunt bombers, lacked the performance and radar capability to fight other fighters. The Liechtenstein radar, excellent for tracking large, straight-flying bombers, struggled to maintain lock on the more agile P-61s. Additionally, German night fighters carried relatively light armament, 20mm and 30mm cannon optimized for bomber destruction but requiring sustained fire to damage a fighter. The P-61, by contrast, was purpose-built for fighter combat. Its 4 20mm cannon could destroy any aircraft with a 1-second burst. Its SCR-720 radar could track evasive targets. Its speed and maneuverability matched or exceeded German night fighters. Most critically, its radar range advantage meant P-61 crews detected German fighters before Germans detected them, a decisive advantage in night combat, where first detection usually meant first kill.
By September 1944, P-61 crews had refined their tactics into a systematic hunting methodology that maximized their technological advantages while minimizing risks. Captain Michael Harrison, now an ace with 6 night kills, documented the standard intercept procedure. Patrol at altitude above expected German night fighter operating zones. Radar operator continuously scans for contacts. Upon detection, analyze target's behavior. Bombers fly straight and level. Fighters maneuver while hunting. Close to 1 mile using radar guidance while maintaining position in target's blind spot. Achieve visual identification at 600 to 800 yards. Close to 400 yards, fire 2-second burst. Disengage immediately and climb away using our speed advantage. Never pursue a damaged target. Another German fighter might be nearby. 1 kill, 1 pass, immediate departure. This disciplined approach proved devastatingly effective. Lieutenant Robert Morrison's crew, flying Midnight Rider, had increased their tally to 9 confirmed kills by September using these exact procedures. Morrison described the psychological advantage. German night fighters are focused on finding bombers below them. They're scanning forward and down with their radar. We approach from above and behind, their radar's blind spot. By the time their tail warning receiver alerts them, we're already in firing position. They react by braking hard, but we've already fired. They're evading a burst that's already hit them. The P-61's dorsal turret added another dimension of lethality. While the pilot focused on flying and shooting, the gunner could track targets and fire independently using radar guidance. This meant P-61s could engage 2 targets simultaneously or maintain defensive fire while the pilot maneuvered. Technical Sergeant James Cooper, now a radar operator ace with 11 kills, explained the crew coordination. I'm watching the radar scope, calling out target positions and ranges. The pilot's flying on instruments, positioning based on my directions. The gunner's monitoring the turret scope, ready to engage targets I identify. We're hunting as a team, each crew member focused on their specific role. German night fighters typically have 2-man crews, pilot and radar operator. We have 3, which means better situational awareness and more firepower.
Luftwaffe Command attempted several countermeasures, all proving inadequate against the P-61's technological superiority. In August 1944, Nachtjagdgeschwader units received upgraded tail warning receivers intended to detect American radar. The equipment proved minimally effective. By the time it detected P-61 radar, the American fighter was usually already in firing position. Hauptmann Ernst Weber, intelligence officer, reported the problem. The American radar operates at frequencies our warning receivers struggle to detect consistently. Additionally, the radar's range means they can track us from positions where we cannot detect them. By the time we receive warning, they're already committed to attack. The warning system provides seconds of alert, insufficient time for effective evasion. German night fighters also attempted flying in pairs for mutual support, but this proved tactically problematic. Night formation flying was extremely demanding, reducing each pilot's attention to threats. Additionally, P-61 crews quickly learned to identify paired fighters and simply avoid them, hunting isolated targets. The most desperate countermeasure was the development of new tactics specifically for evading P-61 attacks. Oberleutnant Franz Becker, who had become the Luftwaffe's leading expert on P-61 evasion through the simple expedient of surviving multiple encounters, wrote a tactical manual that was distributed to all night fighter units in September 1944. Upon receiving tail warning alert indicating fighter radar, execute immediate violent evasion, full throttle, hard brake turn with dive, changing direction unpredictably. Do not fly straight for even 1 second. The American fighter requires stable tracking for accurate gunnery. Violent maneuvers break their firing solution. Continue evasive action for minimum 30 seconds, then use full throttle to extend distance. The P-61 is fast, but sustained evasion will usually allow escape. Critical. Abort attack on original target. Your survival is now priority. An American night fighter in your vicinity means you are the target, not the hunter.
While P-61s hunted German night fighters over Europe, other Black Widow squadrons deployed to the Pacific faced a different challenge. Japanese aircraft operating primarily at lower altitudes over vast ocean expanses. The 6th Night Fighter Squadron, arriving at Saipan in June 1944, encountered Japanese bomber raids attempting to hit American invasion forces under cover of darkness. The tactics that worked in Europe required adaptation for Pacific conditions. Lieutenant Colonel David Chen, commanding the 6th, identified the key differences. In Europe, we hunt at high altitude where German night fighters operate. In the Pacific, Japanese bombers attack at low level, sometimes below 5,000 feet, using terrain masking and darkness to approach targets. Our radar gives us enormous advantage, but we must patrol at lower altitudes where we have less warning time and more ground clutter on radar. The first significant Pacific night action occurred on July 7, 1944, when Japanese bombers attempted to raid Saipan's airfields. Captain Thomas Mitchell, flying P-61 Pacific Predator, detected a formation of Betty bombers at 8,000 feet using his SCR-720 radar. "I had 5 contacts on scope, flying in formation toward our airfields," Mitchell recalled. "Close to visual range, 3 miles out, I could see them silhouetted against stars. They had no idea we were there. Positioned above and behind the formation, dropped down to 400 yards on the trailing aircraft, fired a 3-second burst. The Betty exploded, fuel tanks gone up. Immediately moved to the second aircraft, another burst, another explosion. The remaining 3 scattered in panic. I tracked one with radar through his evasive turns, caught him 2 miles later, destroyed him. 3 kills in 5 minutes. They never knew what was killing them." The psychological impact on Japanese aircrews mirrored the German experience, terror of an invisible predator hunting in darkness they'd considered safe. Japanese bomber losses to P-61s forced abandonment of night raids against American-held islands, exactly as German night fighter losses had forced tactical changes in Europe.
By November 1944, P-61 squadrons had compiled combat records that proved the aircraft's revolutionary effectiveness. 422nd Night Fighter Squadron, Europe. Combat operations, 4 months. Total missions, 187. German aircraft destroyed, 43. P-61 combat losses, 2, both to ground fire, none to enemy aircraft. Kill ratio, 21.5 to 1. 6th Night Fighter Squadron, Pacific. Combat operations, 5 months. Total missions, 219. Japanese aircraft destroyed, 38. P-61 combat losses, 1. Mechanical failure, none to enemy aircraft. Kill ratio, 38 to 1. These statistics revealed a fundamental shift in night air warfare. The P-61 had achieved air superiority in its operational domain so complete that enemy aircraft avoided areas where Black Widows patrolled. Both German and Japanese forces increasingly restricted night operations to areas where American night fighters weren't known to operate. Lieutenant James Cooper, analyzing the success factors, identified the critical elements. Superior radar detection range means we find them first. That's 80% of the battle won right there. Superior radar tracking means we can follow them through evasive maneuvers. That's another 15%. The final 5% is having enough firepower to destroy them with one quick burst. The Germans and Japanese are flying aircraft designed to hunt bombers, adapted for night operations. We're flying an aircraft designed from the first blueprint to kill other aircraft in total darkness. Purpose-built beats adapted every time. By early 1945, Luftwaffe night fighter operations had effectively collapsed under combined pressure from P-61s, RAF Mosquitoes, and fuel shortages. German night fighters, once the terror of bomber crews, were reduced to defensive operations, attempting to protect cities rather than hunting bombers. Captain Michael Harrison, leading the 422nd's final combat missions in March 1945, found German night fighters had become scarce.
We are patrolling entire sectors without contacts. Intelligence indicates most German night fighter units have withdrawn to airfields deeper in Germany or been disbanded due to fuel shortages. The few we encounter are using hit-and-run tactics, make one pass at bombers, then flee before we can intercept. They're not hunting anymore, they're surviving. The few encounters that did occur followed predictable patterns. P-61 radar detected German fighters at long range. Germans, warned by increasingly effective tail warning receivers, immediately disengaged, abandoning any attack on bombers to escape the American night fighters. The hunters had become the hunted so completely that German night fighters avoided combat even when it meant abandoning their missions. Lieutenant Robert Morrison, completing his combat tour in April 1945 with 14 night kills, reflected on the transformation. When we arrived in May 1944, German night fighters owned the darkness. They operated with complete confidence, hunting bombers methodically. By the time I left in April 1945, they fled the moment our radar tracked them. We didn't just defeat them tactically, we broke them psychologically. They couldn't see us, couldn't track us, couldn't fight us effectively. The darkness they trusted became our weapon. They went from predators to prey in less than a year. In October 1945, Allied technical intelligence teams evaluated captured German night fighter equipment and interrogated surviving crews. The reports confirmed what combat results had already demonstrated. The P-61 had rendered German night fighting technology obsolete. Liechtenstein SN2 radar, examined at Wright Field, Ohio, proved to be fundamentally limited technology. Maximum range of 4 miles versus SCR-720's 5+ miles. Manual range tracking versus automatic ranging. Single target capability versus multiple target tracking. The German radar was adequate for hunting straight-flying bombers, but inadequate for fighting other fighters. Technical Sergeant Marta Rodriguez, part of the evaluation team, summarized the comparison. The German radar was 1940 technology refined through 1944. Our SCR-720 was 1944 technology incorporating lessons from 5 years of radar development. They were still using what worked against bombers, we built specifically to fight fighters. The generation gap in capability was decisive. In 1947, Major Werner Hauptmann, writing his account of night fighting operations for the official German Military History Project, provided the definitive German perspective. The American P-61 Black Widow destroyed German night fighting superiority not through superior tactics or braver crews, but through overwhelming technological advantage combined with tactical doctrine that maximized those advantages. We had been fighting night-air war since 1940. We had refined our tactics through thousands of combat missions. We had experienced crews with years of night fighting experience. We believed our expertise and experience would overcome any American attempt to challenge our dominance. We were wrong. The Americans didn't try to match our experience, they built a machine that made experience less relevant. Their radar found us before they found us. That single advantage decided 90% of engagements before the first shot was fired. The side that detects first in night combat usually kills first. They detected first consistently. Additionally, they understood their advantages and exploited them without mercy. They didn't seek extended combat where our experience might have mattered. They detected us with their superior radar, closed using our blind spots, destroyed us with their heavy cannon, and departed before we could react. It was systematic slaughter, using technology we couldn't match and tactics we couldn't counter. Most critically, they deployed a purpose-built night fighter while we adapted day fighters for night operations. The P-61 was designed from conception for darkness hunting. Everything about it, the radar, the armament, the 3-man crew, the cockpit layout, optimized night fighting effectiveness. Our Bf-110s and Ju-88s were excellent aircraft, but they were adaptations. Purpose-built beats adapted in technical combat. The American achievement was creating not just an aircraft, but a complete system. Superior radar,
heavy armament, three-man crews, specialized training, and tactical doctrine, all designed to dominate night air combat. They didn't just build a better night fighter, they built a night fighting system that made our entire approach obsolete.
In 1950, the U.S. Air Force published a comprehensive study of P-61 operations that confirmed the aircraft's revolutionary impact. P-61 Black Widow Combat Effectiveness, 1944 to 1945. Total aircraft produced, 706. Combat aircraft deployed, 421. Total combat sorties, 7,258. Enemy aircraft destroyed, 127, Europe and Pacific combined. Combat losses to enemy aircraft, 2. Kill ratio, 63.5 to 1. These statistics represented more than mere numbers. They demonstrated that purpose-built night fighters with superior radar had fundamentally changed air warfare. The era of adapting day fighters for night operations had ended. Future night fighters would follow the P-61 template, dedicated designs with sophisticated radar, heavy armament, and specialized crews. More significantly, the P-61 had proven that technological superiority could overcome experience and numbers. German night fighter crews had years of combat experience. Japanese pilots had developed sophisticated night bombing tactics. Both were rendered largely irrelevant by American radar technology and purpose-built aircraft. The night sky, once a sanctuary for German hunters and Japanese raiders, had become an American domain through technological dominance and systematic tactical exploitation of that dominance. In 1958, at a joint aviation history conference in Washington, former adversaries met to discuss night fighting operations. Major Werner Hoffmann, representing the German Military History Office, found himself in conversation with Captain Michael Harrison, who had commanded the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron. The two men stood before a preserved P-61 Black Widow at the Smithsonian, discussing the aircraft that had changed night fighting. "I encountered your squadron 4 times," Hoffmann said through a translator. "Each time, we detected your radar tracking us and immediately disengaged. We learned that survival meant fleeing the moment your radar found us. Remaining in the area meant death." Harrison nodded. "Our crews understood that German night fighters were experienced and dangerous if we gave them the chance to fight on equal terms. So we never gave you that chance. We used our radar advantage to attack from positions you couldn't counter, fired, and departed. We turned night fighting into assassination rather than combat." "Assassination is the correct term," Hoffmann replied. "Your radar made the night sky transparent while we remained blind. You saw everything. We saw nothing until your cannon fired. It was like fighting in darkness against an opponent with perfect vision. No amount of experience or courage can overcome that disadvantage." He paused, studying the massive black aircraft. "When your P-61s first appeared, we dismissed them. The Americans cannot master night fighting, we told ourselves. They lack the experience, the expertise. We believed night fighting required years of training that you hadn't invested. We were wrong. You hadn't spent years training pilots to hunt in darkness. You'd spent years building a machine that could see through darkness perfectly. Technology defeated experience completely." Harrison gestured at the radar nose cone. The SCR-720 radar in that nose cone was worth more than 10 years of pilot training. It allowed rookies with 200 hours of nighttime to defeat veterans with 2,000 hours because the technology gave us advantages that couldn't be overcome through skill alone. "That is the lesson that ended an era," Hoffmann said quietly. "In previous wars, experience and training determined victory. In modern warfare, technology determines advantage, and no amount of experience can overcome a technological gap this significant. You didn't defeat us through better tactics or superior courage. You defeated us by arriving with weapons from the next generation of warfare, while we were still fighting with the previous generation. The two men stood silently, looking at the matte black aircraft that represented the end of German night fighting dominance and the beginning of radar-guided air combat. We laughed when intelligence first reported American night fighters over Europe. We were the masters of darkness, operating in conditions where the British barely survived and the Americans didn't dare venture. Then you arrived with your Black Widows, and the darkness we owned became yours. We went from hunters to hunted in weeks. The night sky changed hands, and there was nothing we could do to take it back. The Germans owned the night through experience and refined tactics. The Americans took it with radar and purpose-built hunters. Technology won, and the masters of darkness became the hunted.